these were already pre-cut right now, but I'm going to demonstrate how I did it. First of all, you want a nice mat cutter like this. It's a utility knife / mat cutter. It cuts a nice perfect straight cut, which is nice. I never ever use those ones where you break the blade off bit by bit to get a new blade on it. Every time you're doing that, you're breaking the point off too, and you're getting a dull blade. So don't cheapen out on these things. These things are good for life. You'll find many uses for one of these things, and like I said, you can replace the blade with it. I don't even have a name brand for one. Any of them will work great as long as they have the little sliding mechanism on there, the lock and slide, and it takes regular standard blades that you can buy anywhere. And sometimes they come with 5 blades, which are kept in the handle itself. All right, so this is a great knife to use for cutting mats. My mat cutter does come with this straight edge cutting blade, but like I said, it's inconvenient to use this thing with the mat cutter. You can do it much quicker if you have a ruler and just a good ruler with a cork backing and a mat knife like so. All right, so how you do that is you measure out your materials, your mat board, and your foam core. Okay, so this is a acid-free mat. It's a 4-ply, specifically a 4-ply acid-free mat, which are standard in the picture framing world. But you got to be careful because they do come in 2-ply mats. And at one time I accidentally mixed that up. 2-ply mats are half as thick as this, and they're really thin. They don't really come up off the paper, and in some cases your paper is just as thick as a 2-ply mat. All right, so 4-ply is what you want to go with. They also make 8-ply mats, which are museum standard mats. To use an 8-ply mat, they're more expensive, and they're very difficult to cut on a first swipe because you're cutting through 8 plies of mat board. So I suggest generally just getting yourself some 4-ply mat board and be done with it. It's also named museum board, is what the standard white quality is, so you can see it either as mat board or museum board, and you're looking for 100% acid free. How do you know if your mat has acid in it or not, or is acid free? You just simply look at the edge of the mat. If the edge of the mat is white, then it's acid-free mat. If the edge of the mat at all has any yellowing or discoloring to it, that means it has acid in it. Acid mats, at one time they were about $7. Acid-free mats in comparison to price are anywhere from $14 to $18 a sheet. And we're talking about a 32 by 40 sheet of mat board. So you always want to go acid-free. Avoid the ones with the acid in it if you can. All right. Because they do give you yellow bevels on them. All right, and for foam core, you want to try to get acid-free foam core if you can do it. A lot of places only carry regular foam core. How do you know the difference between acid-free and regular? Regular foam core has a slick surface to it and is usually pure white, whereas acid-free foam core is a little bit off-white and has a fuzzy surface to it. All right, and this does, so I think it's acid-free foam core. I'm not 100% sure. The one that will trick you is that I used to buy foam core from the Dollar Tree, standard dollar store, and it does have a fuzzy paper-like surface to it, but it's only $1 a sheet, and we're talking a 20-inch by 30-inch sheet for $1, and it just doesn't add up in my mind to say that that's acid-free. All right, it's just probably cheaper foam core. So like I said, looking for the acid-free foam core. It has a fuzzier look to it, but it will also be more expensive than regular foam core. You can get away with using a mat as a backing. So if you're buying a full sheet of mat board and you're cutting out a small mat with it, in this case I think I could probably get 4 mats out of one full sheet of board. I could use one sheet for the front of the artwork as the actual mat, and then the backing as a backing sheet. And that will protect the artwork from any backing that would have acid. If you have cardboard backing, throw it out immediately. If you buy a ready-made frame, most of those come with cardboard, you just throw the backing out. It's useless, or use it for some sort of interesting sculpture or something. But it's got a lot of acid in it, and you definitely don't want that on your work. All right. So anyway, cutting your materials down, you simply measure out and mark your materials in 2 places from the edge of the material. In this case it was supposed to be 14.5 by 16 and a half, so I already did that. And I use a cutting mat underneath. I happen to have a cutting mat. Cutting mats are recommended. You don't want to cut into your table surface, and you also don't want to dull your blade out. If you cut through wood, you're going to actually dull your blade out as well as damage your table. And whereas a cutting mat, these are called self-healing ones. They actually make you they don't dull your blade out as quickly. If you don't have one of these, or you can't afford one of these, that's one use for your cardboard backing. Also, you could do it with a piece of corrugated cardboard, or compressed cardboard would be better. Think about the backs of notebook pads, things like that, on a larger scale would work great, and they're just fine. All right, so I happen to have something else that's a special tool. So I have a ruler here, and I have this thing which is called a safety edge. What's nice about a safety edge is when you're cutting, you don't run the risk of running into your finger like this. That's the biggest danger with cutting a mat, is running through your finger. And believe me, I've done it 3 times in my life. Ran right through the fingernail. So when you're cutting with a regular ruler, you would line it up with the edge of your material, and then you would cut through the material with repeated cuts. And then you can see how when I'm pressing in here, I want to jump, there's a chance that you can always jump the ruler and run right into your finger when you're doing it. With the safety edge, you've got that border edge there protecting you from the chance of that happening. The other thing that's nice about these is they're rubber backed, just like cork backed rulers. They don't slide on your material when you're cutting. But these things are more expensive. They're about $100. Whereas a ruler will cost you about maybe $9. But if you get a regular ruler, just make sure it's aluminum, and make sure it has like a cork backing to it. All right, what I'm going to demonstrate for cutting is here. I'm going to be cutting these strips of foam core, and they're used for shadow box framing, which I'll also talk about when I get to it. But right now I'm just going to demonstrate cutting for you. So when I cut with this, I line it up with my 2 marks on the foam core itself, and then I cut through like this. And I'm not trying to cut through in one swipe. You can just do small gradual cuts. When you force the blade through in one cut, what happens is a lot of times it will it will either cut irregularly, or it leaves a torn edge to it sometimes. So when you cut with a single swipe through the material a lot of times, so don't pressure yourself to get through the material. Several cuts will actually give you a cleaner cut edge. Alright, and you also run the risk when you try to force it through of it jumping up over your ruler and right into your finger. So this is basically how I do it. Just a couple little swipes through there, and then I got clean strip cuts. Alright, so that's basically how it's done. Now we're going to move right into cutting your mats, cutting the opening for your mat. Right, I've got my backing and I've got my mat here. First thing I want to look at is which side is the front and which side is the back of the mat. A lot of times there's print on one side or the other, and that tells you which the side is, or it's an off-white on the one side versus a regular white. This one I'm comparing with my other piece of mat board, and it seems to be that it doesn't matter too much. This is probably the back side though, I'm assuming. Alright, on the back side, you want to cut with the mat good side facing down. Alright, so with the mat cutter here, that we have here, I've got a Logan 301S mat cutter, and like I said, this is the simplest system you can buy for a mat cutter. You don't want to go cheaper. The cheapest is just buying a blade, a mat cutter blade, and what you use is a blade and a ruler. And if you can imagine how difficult that's going to be to cut out, it's very complicated. The next system up that they sell is a mat cutter that's connected to a free-flowing ruler. So imagine a mat cutter along a ruler, and still you've got to try to hold that straight as you're cutting. The system has a block here that you can set your specific measurement on, and you're guaranteed to get a parallel cut to the edge of your mat board. So don't go any cheaper than the system when you're looking at a mat cutter. Alright, avoid avoid that. And these things are nice. They come with like a straight edge cutter which you can use. You can also buy the glass cutter that attaches to it, and also now they even come with a CD on teaching you how to do all sorts of fancy mat cutting, which is cool. Anyway, which I've never actually looked at. Gosh, do we even put CDs in computers anymore? I assume this has been years since I bought that mat cutter. It probably doesn't come with a CD now. It comes with a flash drive. Anyway, here we go. On this measurement, I know I need a 3-inch border all the way around my mat. I had figured that out earlier, just before I even cut my frame. I figured out how much mat border I want. So you want to read the scale. It says here, read the scale from this side. Make sure you read the scale from the right side. You just set that in place and then tighten these little knobs up on here. And then there we got 3 inches on there. And then I've got a backing mat underneath it. I'll tell you why that is in a second. And I forgot which side this is again. This side looks a little cleaner than that side, so that's a good side. Alright, so you rest your mat up against the edge right here, and you have to lift this edge up. Now the more expensive mat cutters have a hinge on this edge, and they actually get bigger. This one you're limited to 32 inches, so you can only do mats for 32 inches. That's fine for me. Most of the time I don't do any mats any bigger than that. Anyway, I'm never matting anything that's any larger than 32 inches. If I get bigger, I just use shadow box frame. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is once you rest the mat up here, make sure it's rested along the edge perfectly parallel, and you want to draw some lines, alright, using a pencil. I'm going to rotate this around. Remember, this is the back side of the mat, so you don't have to worry about your pencil lines. And I'm going to draw lines on all 4 sides as I rotate around the mat. So, there we go. Alright, and all of these lines are perfectly parallel to my edges, and they're also 3 inches from the edges of the mat. Alright, now these lines are important because they tell you where to start and where to stop the mat cutter as you're cutting through the mat itself. And I'm not positioned right on this. I guess it should be positioned more this way because it's easier to do it in a pushing motion. So I'm going to position myself on this side of the table. And right here on the mat cutter, you'll see there's a little marker. That's where you start the mat cutter. And then over here is where you finish it at the next line. And that's where the marker tells you to start and stop from. Alright, so essentially what you do is you make sure that the mat is held down with your one hand, your non-dominant hand, and maybe even have a couple fingers on the edge of the ruler pressing down on the mat. And then what you do is you sink the blade into the mat itself, just like that, all the way down, and then you push forward with the mat cutter. And then you stop exactly on that line. Put that line up right there, and then I pull the mat cutter out of it. Just like that. Alright, then you rotate the mat around and do the same thing. But before you do that, you want to shift the board that's underneath it. Alright, now this backing board is really important. There is a line in the mat cutter, so you wouldn't cut into the mat cutter itself most of the time. But what's important is to have a board. You need a mat board underneath it, because when you're cutting out that mat, it pushes down on that that bottom edge, and if there's nothing for it to go against it, it creates a frayed edge to it, and it doesn't look nice at all. Alright, so make sure you have a bottom mat on there, and every time you make a cut, you want to shift that bottom mat so it doesn't cut in the same track line, or you can also get that frayed edge. Alright, so I shifted the mat underneath, and now I'm ready to cut the second one. And you can do this one, just like that, rotate it around, shift the bottom mat a little bit, and cut the next side. For this video, I'm only going to talk about single mat cutting. Maybe I'll make a video later about double mats and triple mats. But usually those aren't things used for artists. Artists usually want to make their artwork stand out more than the mat board or the frame itself, so they don't really involve themselves with double mats. Double mats create a highlight of a different color, you know, or create more shadow on the picture. And they're really just used for, let the collectors worry about that kind of stuff. There we go. Alright, so I cut all 4 sides just like that, very quickly. Alright, when you cut the 4 sides out, you want to be careful not to poke out the mat just yet. I'm going to carefully flip the mat over. And because this is a cheaper mat cutter, it doesn't really cut right to the corner. So what I'll do is I'll take an extra blade, maybe an old blade that I had in the mat cutter before, rest it perfectly on that bevel, and then ride it to the corner. There's one, just like this. So I'm resting it along the bevel edge and I'm bringing it out like that. And then I guess that's the one where I missed on each one. Alright, I'm going to stop all the comments before they start. If you are a professional framer, you know that it takes practice to cut out a good mat, alright? And if you're using a good mat cutter, a lot of times you don't have little divots in the corners. What professional framers look for is a 100% perfect little cut corner, alright? Which I can do a lot of the time, but if you see that this corner is a little indented or pressed out, it's just simply because you're pressing in too hard as you're cutting when you're starting the cut or finishing the cut. But these have to be 100% perfect for a frame shop quality. For personal quality, most people are not going to notice little issues like that. If you do have an overcut on your corner, you may see that too, and you can take which is a bone folder or just even a little metal spoon or something and just lightly polish out those little overcuts. Once you have your mat cut out just like this, we're ready to mount it to the backing. So you have your mat, you got your backing cut to size. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to hinge your mat to your backing. Notice, by the way, this backing, it's just because I don't have a free piece of mat or foam core, so I just actually tape two scrap pieces together and then cut it perfectly even on that. It's perfectly fine for support, especially if you don't have a lot of money to work with when you're framing as a student. Here we go. So what I'm doing is I stuck a scrap piece of mat underneath that to raise the mat up to the edge of the foam core, and I'm resting the mat just right up to the edge of the foam core. And now I'm just taking regular tape and mounting that to the backing. Just across there like that. That creates a hinge. Alright, so there we go. We got a hinge on our mat. That can be just regular tape because the tape doesn't come in contact with the artwork at all. And then we set the artwork in place. And I've got one of these to choose from. I'll choose this one. Set the artwork underneath the mat. A lot of people when they do this, they usually put the artwork, tape the artwork to the mat, and that's a bad idea. It's very difficult to work from the back of the mat anyway and try to see what you're aligning up, because now it's the important part, which is aligning the artwork and making sure that it's straight within your mat board itself in your opening. So just like that, I was able to fairly quickly straighten that out and have it right in place exactly where I need it to be. And I also double check these corners down here because sometimes that hinge isn't perfect and you want to make sure your mat's straight while you're aligning and adjusting the work. Alright, then you want to lay something heavy on top of it in the center. At the frame shop we use these little sandbags and we'll set on there, but anything you have around that's pretty clean, because you're sitting it directly on the artwork and has some weight to it. This doesn't have a lot of weight to it, but it'll work, alright? And then I'm going to carefully flip that back up again. Then I can mount the artwork to the backing of the mat. You never mount to the front. Alright, you're going to have to imagine with me, this is acid-free tape, alright? I'll talk about acid-free tape. Acid-free tape, they have adhesive acid-free tape, which already has an adhesive on it. In a sense, so it's like regular tape, only you peel off the backing with the adhesive part, and it's acid-free linen tape, self-adhesive it's called, and usually that's what you want to use for your artwork, not regular tape like I'm using right here. I don't happen to have any with me as I'm doing the demo, and so I'm going to have to demonstrate how it's done with regular tape. Alright? So, when you're mounting the artwork down, you generally do it at the top, and you cut like little pieces of acid-free tape. They're about an inch long, or a little less than an inch, and you'll take it and you'll stick 2 under the top, all right? So it's sticky side up, resting down like that. There's 1 there, and I have them in kind of far from the center of the, from the outside of the artwork, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. And then the second one goes here, sticky side up. Oops, I bounced my artwork. Alrighty, so I'm going to carefully do this again. That's why my object wasn't heavy enough and it moved on me. We're still alright as long as we shift it back. Okay, we got it back to order. Alright, a little bit more cautious this time. I'm going to put one hand on the artwork. Okay, so then that's the sticky side upside. You see the tab sticking out like that, and then you go with a piece just parallel to the edge of your top edge of your artwork, sticky side down, and that crosses over that sticky side upside, sticky side up part of the tape. So there we go. Then we got this one, lay that one parallel across the edge. All right, what you have there is a mounted artwork. It's mounted with only 2 layers of tape. All right, that's the way frame shops do it. You might have seen in the past they actually flip the artwork up and they create this hinge with the sticky side down. You end up with 2 layers of tape underneath your artwork, making your artwork stick up or raise up a little bit. And sometimes you can see that shadow on the mat, and you don't want to see that. It's not a good idea to have that. All right, so there you go. It's mounted at the top, and if you want, you can put a little piece of tape at the bottom. But this is going to be silly. I did all that to do that. If you're putting a piece underneath the bottom, you just put it in the center and you kind of fold it over like this as a slight roll. And then you can see it's just a very tiny piece, and I'll just stick it right under there. If I needed it, ideally I don't really necessarily need it. All right, if you don't have tape, or if you have enough of a border around it like I do for this print, you can also use what's called photo corners, and you can find photo mount corners in scrapbooking section at any craft store, and they're really nice. They have adhesive on the back, they're plastic. You slide them, they're like little pockets, and you slide them over the corners of the artwork and then press it down right here and here, and then you're all set. You can remove the artwork. The artwork is not stuck to any adhesive whatsoever, which is the most perfect way a museum would like your artwork. All right, and because the corners are up here, they don't appear in the mat board itself. So there you go, that's a mounted piece of